with COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, cities are facing a lot of stressors, but just on their populations, as well as cities being on the front lines of the climate crisis, seeing these impacts and trying to adapt. So that's definitely a challenge in terms of just getting resources and having any time to prioritize animal welfare. And another barrier, it's just, like I said, it being such a new topic, it's like, okay, how can we even, the hope of this report is to answer that question that cities may have of how can we even get started? We've never considered this before, or we're new to this, depending on the jurisdiction. How can we get started? And I think that the hope of this report is to say there are many ways to get started.
Hi, my name is Juliana Roth, and this is Conversations with Animals.
So my name is Alisa White. I am a legal fellow at the Ecology Center on Environmental, Energy, and Land Use Law at NYU School of Law. We're a center that focuses on land use policy, state and local climate and environmental policy, as well as how animals and animal law intersects with that, among a number of other topics. We're doing lots of interesting stuff. But today I'm here to talk about a new report that we released with the Guarini Center, the Wild Animal Welfare Program at NYU, and also the Law, Ethics, and Animals program at Yale Law School. So this report is a collaboration. It's called Wild Animal Welfare in Local Policies on Land Use and the Built Environment. So I'm just here to share some of the findings from the report and give a sense of really like what cities can start to do about wild animal welfare, which I think to many folks might be a new topic, or so I'm happy to give a kind of a definition and some background there. But really exciting report, and it's been great to be. I'm the lead author on the report. Been working with a really great team of people to put this together. So thanks for having me here today to talk more about wild animals and cities and and all of that.
Great. Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me and maybe a lot of listeners is it seems like it's framed always like as an antagonist relationship. Like we're trying to control the animals in city, or like, obviously rats, things like that here in New York, where like they're the villains, we need to be protected. And especially in cities, a lot of our animal interactions might feel that way, like unwelcome. So I think it's interesting the report reframes that as like there's ways to like collaborate with the animals, and that they're actually sharing the environment with us. So some of those interactions that are negative even could like be prevented possibly through things like this. But what were like the main findings from the report in terms of ways cities can start to integrate being more welcoming to animals? Taking consideration what they need from the environment.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a great question to start with. So I think first a couple framing points that I think will help people understand what this report does, and then what it doesn't do. This is a big topic, so we tried to take off a bite-sized portion of this world of wild animal welfare in cities. So first, we focus on the definition of how in the report we define wild animal welfare based on what's out there in the scientific literature. So when we talk about wild animal welfare, we're talking about the biological, behavioral, and mental functioning of individual wild animals. So I think people may be more familiar with biodiversity or species level concerns, the diversity of animal species, things like that. We're thinking about the essentially the lived experience of an individual wild animal in the urban context. So just to give folks a bit of framing around that. And then in addition, we decided to focus on city policies that are likely to have these triple benefits to both humans, wild animals, and to the climate and environment more broadly. So we focus on these mutually beneficial policies to give examples of how cities can promote the welfare of both humans and wild animals. So there is a range of policies that are what we describe in the report as more welfare complex, where there might be trade-offs between human and animal welfare or the welfare of different animals. We acknowledge there's many types of policies and situations out there where there are those trade-offs. For this report, we're trying to focus on some first steps that cities can take that benefit humans, animals, and the climate. So just to give a sense of framing around what we focus on. And I think also, like you mentioned, this is a new framing in the sense of it's not just antagonistic relationships, it's not just pest control, that wild animals are having a lived experience in cities, and the policies that cities decide to implement have an impact on the welfare and the experiences of those animals. So yeah, just a couple of framing pieces there. And then in terms of the main findings, this report is more so a menu of policy options. So the hope is that city policymakers, or really any local policymaker, it could be a county or a town. We use the word cities as a catch-all, but there's many different types of local governments that could implement these policies. We try to provide them with a menu of options of places to start. So the policy brief itself covers over 25 different discrete policy examples, which I can share a couple of those later for more context. So they range from everything from green infrastructure policies to building related policies. For example, bird-friendly building materials that can be implemented in local policy. So it's a wide range. The menu of options, and the hope is that people can pick it up and say, oh, this is something that we could do in our city, or oh, that one maybe not so much right now, and kind of think about that. So we have this menu of options, and then we also provide some overarching guiding principles for cities that are trying to start to take animal welfare into account broadly across policies. Happy to kind of give the laundry list, but those overarching approaches include incorporating wild animal welfare into existing wildlife monitoring. A number of cities already to some extent monitor wild animals in their parks and open spaces. To incorporate wild animal welfare indicators into that monitoring, to include wild animal welfare as an existing city plans is one of the second overarching approaches. So that could be in a climate action plan, in a green infrastructure plan, buildings related planning documents. There's many city plans that are already out there, that planning documents that affect the welfare of wild animals. So the hope is just starting to consider wild animals in those would be a great first step, and also not kind of the low-hanging fruit of how can we start to think about this. And then we also give some, after those more low-hanging fruit overarching approaches, we move into sharing examples of cities that have developed animal welfare related planning, a separate planning document related to animals and their welfare, and cities that have an animal welfare official. There are some cities that have either a whole office or an official that is working on this. Those are things that cities could consider as they build that capacity to, it's not saying, you need to hire an animal welfare officer today, but moving towards those kind of more institutional approaches to animal welfare at the city level. And then we also talk a bit about how cities can pass wildlife ordinances that bundle together policies that could benefit wild animals. So, yeah, that's a lot of content. So I could talk forever, but I'll let you ask another question. But yeah, those are kind of the main overarching principles. And then there's a menu of policies. That's kind of the main, those are the two kind of core findings or sections of the report.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think, that's what we're here for, is to learn those things.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you were researching, putting together the report, did you notice that in the cities where they don't have the animal welfare official or office, is this because of maybe not valuing the fact that animals do have this lived experience? Is it just something that historically maybe has been put into other offices? I know animal control is usually in the police department, and it's not even its own thing. So I'm just wondering, what do you think the existing barriers to even considering animal welfare are?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's kind of backing up to I dove right into some of the things of the report, backing up to the impetus for the report in the first place was that we were looking at animal welfare, and especially wild animal welfare. That's even another, there's talk about animal welfare laws in terms of animals that are considered pets, like dogs, cats, and alike, and animal welfare in the farmed animal context. So chickens, cows, alike. So wild animal welfare is even much newer. So we're talking about
a whole other.
That's part of the reason, the impetus for this report was we were looking at wild animal welfare specifically, and seeing that it's really a missing issue across all levels of government, not just cities, but at the state and federal and international levels. And animal welfare being a missing issue, and certainly wild animal welfare being a missing issue. So part of the reason for doing this report was to get, hopefully to inspire policymakers to be thinking about this in a more welfare and well-being centric approach, rather than just, as you mentioned, a more animal control focused approach at the city level. So yeah, that's part of the reason for writing the report was to apply that wild animal welfare framing to city policies. And yeah, I think in terms of having a wild animal, or an animal welfare officer official, typically these are not just focused on wild animals, it's animal welfare broadly, so including all different animals in the city, but also including wild animals. So for these type of offices are relatively new. So the report highlights one example of the New York City Mayor's Office of Animal Welfare, which was the first animal welfare office of its kind in the United States. And I believe I should check in the report this exact date. Yeah, no, let me see if I have this in front of me. But I believe that was established. So it was established definitely in the past. So there was a liaison, and then there was an office. I believe the office itself was in the past. It was in the past 5 or so years. So yeah, it's very, new in the United States. And then it's also, it's not systematically happening on a global scale. So part of the report is to just get cities thinking, this is something we could have, and this is something it'd be beneficial to have, to think about the welfare of all animals in the city, and also how it intersects with human welfare. Part of the motivation for doing this report is also thinking about what's called the One Health framing, which talks about how the health of humans, animals, and the environment is interlinked. So things that affect the health and the well-being of animals, as we find in the report, are also interlinked with things that affect the health and well-being of humans, and the environment and also have the potential to impact climate change adaptation or climate change mitigation. It's all intertwined. So part of the hope here is to get cities to think about considering having this type of office in the future. But I think the getting back to your actual question about the barriers, I think
these are all barriers.
Yeah, exactly. So I think barrier number one is just that animal welfare being a missing issue. It's a newer, trying to get it systematically considered across all levels of government. That being a barrier. Another barrier that we talk about is just cities having many competing priorities, as well as, depending on the city, the funding, concerns about funding and what can we spend time on, especially with with COVID-19 pandemic, climate change. Cities are facing a lot of stressors, but just on their populations, as well as cities being on the front lines of the climate crisis, seeing these impacts and trying to adapt. So that's definitely a challenge in terms of just getting resources and having any time to prioritize animal welfare. And another barrier, it's just, like I said, it being such a new topic, it's like, okay, how could we even, the hope of this report is to answer that question that cities may have of how can we even get started? We've never considered this before, or we're new to this, depending on the jurisdiction. How can we get started? And I think the hope of this report is to say there are many ways to get started, and we want this report to give cities ideas of what they can do. But I think that's also inspired our framing for the report around policies that benefit humans, animals, and the environment. As a number of the policies in the report, cities have already started to do these policies, and they can either be tweaked to incorporate it better, consider wild animals, or we're just recommending that other cities adopt these policies. So I think part of the framing of the report is that we want to support cities that are trying to care for their human and animal residents, and that there are ways to care for both. And it's not just kind of an added burden or task for cities to do, is that it's already, it can also help them address climate impacts and to help support their human population as well. So a lot of number of barriers. And I think the final one that I want to mention is just we cover a bit of the wild animal welfare science in the report. We summarize some of that, and another challenge is just measurement and definition around wild animal welfare. It's an emerging field of emerging scientific field. There are unanswered questions about how do we quantify and compare the welfare of different wild animals. And we address this in the report by talking about how there are steps that cities can take now with the science that we have on wild animal welfare that are likely to support wild animal welfare. And then as the science emerges, cities can take that into account over time. So that's one other barrier it's important to mention, but we ultimately address these barriers in the report and explain how cities can still take action now on incorporating wild animal welfare.
Yeah. So we are here in New York City at NYU, right? So I'm curious, like, what are some of the actions, the suggestions from the report that you could see, or maybe are already happening in the city? What are the things that we could focus on?
Yeah, this is a great question.
Yeah.
New York City in a lot of ways is a leader in this space and has implemented a number of policies. So maybe I'll share two things the city has already done, and then I can share one that could be considered in the city. So something great that's been happening in New York is they have local law around bird-friendly building materials on all new buildings or major alterations to the exterior. So bird-friendly building materials prevent bird window collisions, which is a significant cause of mortality, stress, and serious injury and suffering especially to birds, and to other animals as well. And what bird-friendly building materials do is it's either a different type of glass or a type of what's called like frittering pattern on the glass that makes it so that birds do not fly into the glass. Because if it's just no non-bird friendly glass, the birds see the reflection and they fly. They think that they're flying into like a patch of trees, but then they fly into the building. And it can be a real. I mean, the numbers on bird mortality caused by buildings, and it's specifically glass windows and glass buildings in the United States. It's really staggering, not just in New York, but countrywide, especially during bird migrations that happen actually around about now. There's an enormous, it's like a big bird migration time. So New York City has a law requiring this bird-friendly building material in new buildings and major alterations, which is great to see, and it could be implemented there are other localities across the country that are doing this as well, but I think that's a big recommendation in our report, is that it is likely to benefit the welfare of wild animals, especially birds, to require bird-friendly building materials, as well as incentivize. Would like to see more around incentivizing retrofits of existing buildings as well. But yeah, New York has a local law requiring that on new buildings, which is great. As well as like I mentioned earlier, New York City also has the Mayor's Office of Animal Welfare, first in the nation office focused on animal welfare and coordinating that across the city. So that institutionally is really exciting to see. And I think it also just goes to show how New York is working on animal welfare, both institutionally as well as with these discrete policies like bird-friendly building materials. So lots of great stuff going on in New York. Something I'd love to see. I mean, I think this is New York, but more broadly too, is just seeing more work around incorporating wild animals into street design and roads more broadly. Roads are a source of mortality for wild animals, as well as stress around noise pollution from roads and from the use, especially of gas-powered vehicles. Noise pollution can affect the animal communication, foraging, and fitness, all sorts of life processes. So roads, not just in New York, roads broadly create these situations of both mortality, stress, and serious injury for all types of animals. We're talking about everything from deer to invertebrates, like salamanders, lizards, animals that are crossing the road and being hit or injured. And I think I would love to see more, both in New York and widely, about how wild animals use streets. What are the impacts of roads on wild animals, both considering those in road design, as well as some policy outcomes, things like pedestrian streets. It turns out when you just have humans walking around, there's way fewer collisions with animals. It's like the cars colliding with the animals. And so I think there's this synergy of sorts it's a great word. I'm like,
Yeah,
I never get to
like
use, I don't get to use
synergy.
synergy that much. Synergy between things that benefit humans as well, reducing air pollution from roads, reducing traffic noise, that has human health effects as well, and creating pedestrian environments that promotes walking and all of the health benefits
Yeah.
associated with just walking, just being able to safely walk around, that can also benefit animals. So I think that's one of the policies I'm really excited about from the report, is just thinking through road design
Mhm.
and thinking about how transport and how can we build a transport system that better takes animals into account and its negative impacts, the negative impacts of especially car infrastructure on animals, but also thinks about humans and humans thriving and the mobility of people in cities and urban environments. So yeah, that's something I'm really excited about from this report, and would love to see more of in both in New York and beyond as well.
Yeah, I would love that. I mean, I'm like, I would like pedestrian only streets, or I've seen, I think, isn't like Shanghai where they have those the bridges that go over the road that have like grass on them or something.
Yeah,
I'm like,
that's
yeah,
actually a policy we talk about in the report,
yeah.
is wildlife overpasses and underpasses as
Mhm.
well. You can build little pathways underneath. So we for one example, we talk about this, a overpass over one of the freeways in Los Angeles
Mhm.
that's in process right now, and that acting those being a way to allow habitat connectivity for animals and animal movement, which is an important part of their lives and just their experience in the city. So I'm excited about overpasses and underpasses. And yeah, sometimes the underpasses are cool too. We
Yeah.
give an example from I believe it's Concord, Massachusetts, and how they have some underpasses under one of their more heavily trafficked routes. And that's an example of like a smaller locality, Concord. Definitely not New York City size, but still finding ways to incorporate underpasses. And they have all this data on which animals are using the underpasses. And it's just a real joy to learn about and be like, oh, we saw all these raccoons using, it's like, it's instead of crossing the road, they get to go underneath. And yeah, so that's a great, didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
Sharing your enthusiasm.
No,
Sharing your enthusiasm here for, that's one of the, we have a whole section in the report on roads, and that's one of the policy examples that we give as something cities can consider. And yeah, definitely cities, counties. Sometimes these can also be collaborations with other units of government, like state collaborations as well. So definitely we focus on local policies, but there are often opportunities for cities to collaborate with, especially on funding, look for federal or state funding, collaborate with state agencies or state actors, and also collaborate with nonprofits, with universities, with researchers. And there's a lot of important community-led work as well around both things like citizen science and tracking animals, and then just people who are passionate about animals in their community and getting that type of engagement. So we focus on cities, but it's really it takes a village
yeah.
to make these things happen. So yeah.
I love that you brought up the citizen engagement though. So like, what are the things that if someone's listening and they like get inspired and want to go to their maybe city council, or if they're in town municipality, something like that, like what would the things be that they could ask for to pressure those changes to happen?
That's a good question, and it's always interesting with a report like this, because it's broad, so it to some extent it depends.
Right.
Such a lawyer thing to
Yeah.
say, but it I would say I think first I would say finding something that you either like a certain animal or an environment that you're passionate about. What is for a listener, if what is going on your street, in your yard, in your area, and thinking about or in with your neighbors. I think just starting from a place of your lived experience in the city and the lived experience of animals that you see around you. So a couple of examples could be there have been citizen movements around policies about yards and lawns, especially around some cities currently have pretty restrictive policies around plant height in their city laws, in either their zoning ordinances or other codes.
What
So
a bizarre
something
thing to
I
control.
know it's so you really
Howard,
this is a deep dive.
Yeah.
I'm glad we're getting to this because this is a deep dive one.
Yeah.
But it's also my lawyer nerd self is like, the plant height, it's in the zoning, it's in the code. So yeah, some cities restrict the height of plants. It can be up to like a certain number of inches on lawns, which can be difficult if you're trying to plant what we talk about in the report as a naturalized lawn. So that would include flowers that are local to the area, different types of basically like or grasses, basically plant heights that go above that. So there have been some citizen movements around trying to get those plant height prohibitions repealed, or otherwise have something to say, you know, if you're a naturalized lawn, you can have an exemption from this. Because there have been instances where people have wanted to plant either like wildlife gardens, flowers that are either like species that give food provision to food provision to butterflies, like pollinator gardens, and then seeing, oh, like actually there's this plant height restriction either through the city or something like a homeowners association, even if it's not through the city. So I think something that people could do is look at their city and say, oh, like, do we have this type of grass, grass height or plant height restriction in our city, in our county, and you can, that could something that could be repealed. So that's one example of if like this naturalized lawns is something someone is passionate about, they can. And also there's a number of the menu of options. The same way that a city policymaker could look at this report and say, here's a menu of options. A citizen could also say, oh, I'm really passionate about this about naturalized lawns. I'm gonna go advocate for these policies at my local at a local meeting. At there are different types of opportunities for citizen input, or getting together with a group of people is always a great thing. That'd be the second thing is, you know, learning about your area and thinking about what issues you are passionate about, and or any, you know, issues with wild animals that you see in your area. Yeah, and then getting together, like especially with things like the bird-friendly building materials, there are groups of people that have come together to advocate for this all across the country. And so I think there can be ways for individual citizens to plug into existing nonprofits. One other cool example is groups of people getting together locally. It's now in over 100 cities in the United States have passed some version of a gas leaf blower prohibition. So preventing the use of these high decibel noise gas leaf blowers, which have negative impacts on human health. They're spitting out lots of pollutants through these gas-fired mowers and motors and in the leaf blowers. And then there's also all of the noise impacts on animals. And so that's another policy we highlight in the report. Another example of people coming together to say, like, there's so many negative impacts of gas leaf blowers. There are electric ones, or like we don't need to be using them. Like, let's get some restrictions on gas leaf blowers to benefit like human health. And then we also highlight how there are benefits. There are maybe benefits to animals as well by reducing the noise that interrupts animal communication. You can even think of like bird song, right? They literally cannot sing over the gas leaf blowers, and it's and all types of animal communication beyond that. So
wow.
Anyway,
That's
again,
beautiful.
sorry, long answers,
No,
but I trust you will edit as you see fit. But yeah, just lots of examples of ways people can get involved, either, you know, on their own, or like often getting together with a group can be a great way to do it. Because there are you know, always like a chorus of voices coming together can be a way to try to push for policy change.
Yeah, and I love that you're like letting the animals sort of inform those things, because I think it's hard with doing anything with animal rights where you're like, well, I don't want to like speak for them, but they also can't show up in these ways. So it gets like, I'm sure you've gone through this file of like the moral issue, whatever. But I'm curious, because you are doing, you know, law. What are some of the things you're excited about that you're seeing happening in the legal space in terms of like the way we're relating to animals and the environment, and like, yeah, even it connected to the report or outside of the report?
Yeah, this is a good question. And I think a lot about the animals, how the animals not being able to communicate in human language, or not being able to show up to public meetings and things like that. And I think something that I think in the legal space, it's tricky, but I think something that this report has made me think about is just it is just shaping policy around observations of what animals are doing. So in the sense that, yes, we can't truly know, like, oh, you know, they're not able to express their well-being in words, but having an understanding of how animals communicate and understanding like what part of this wild animal welfare science is understanding what stresses animals, you know, and reducing stressors on them as a way to say, okay, this is a decent metric of bettering their welfare by like reducing visible like stress that is visible or otherwise like indicators of stress in animals. So I think to me, centering policies around like incorporating having welfare science be a grounding for policy has been really cool to see in the legal space. And also just thinking creatively about how law and policies can be flexible to emerging science. So just to give a concrete example of this, there is a for bird-friendly building materials. There's a threat factor where they identify different types of building materials and the level of threat that they have in terms of likelihood of causing bird window collisions. And this is being updated as they study more building materials and they develop a better understanding of why do birds fly into windows in the first place. And to have laws that could say, oh, you know, we're going to require bird-friendly building materials based on this material threat factor, giving some flexibility in terms of we know that we're trying to better understand how to support animals, and then seeing that actually come into policy through something that can be updated over time in terms of as the understanding of which materials are most friendly to birds, what is, you know, and then also other factors like the energy efficiency of those materials, right? Like that those are evolving, and just thinking about how policy can reflect emerging science. That's something that I've been really interested in terms of animals, how just the law intersecting with the well-being of animals. And I think that's something I'm keeping. We researched for this report, but I'm keeping an eye out for as I look at laws more broadly, just to say, ooh, like how as our understanding changes, how can laws be more flexible? And there's some there can be legal issues around that too, right? Like how often can you update the laws and dealing with the administrative regulation, you know, having some power to update regulations based on emerging science. And I think that applies in the animal space too. So I hope that answers your question a bit, but something I'm keeping an eye out for, and also just advocating for wild animal welfare science and animal welfare science more broadly to be taken into account in regulatory processes. So we have also in the fall before this report, the Guarini Center in the Wild Animal Welfare Program, we also worked on some comments about a federal regulatory process about advocating for taking animal welfare into account in some of the in regulations that are being promulgated by the federal government. So I think it's all levels of government, but thinking about how to get that emerging understanding at least in front of regulators, so that they're saying, oh, like this, you know, animal welfare science is the thing. Here's how it's changing over time, and trying to get that considered in policies that affect animals in their lives. So that's trying to get that science in there and be like, the science is emerging too. So like, how can we keep thinking about that in and how does that get filtered into laws and regulations?
I love it's like it's a living process. It's like and I love that it's being taken seriously, because I do think it's always been like more of a fringe, like, oh, these like kooky hippies wanting to care about the birds, but and especially because a lot of the historic environmental law was just for hunters, right? Like to be like, protect these wild lands so that we can like hunt on them.
Right. Yeah. I know the
reframing of like, maybe we could do it for other reasons.
It's really interesting. And I think it's definitely an emerging area in law as well, thinking about animal welfare. Like I mentioned, it being a missing issue. And it's really exciting to see more and more people starting to become aware of this, even, you know, lawyers and non-lawyers, you know, law policymakers and the general public, and see, I think it's been a really exciting area for me to work in and learn more about as well, because I think there's so much that can be done to think about animal welfare and to have that going forward, just thinking about and beyond that, thinking about animals not just at the species level. That's been a big watershed for me working on this report. as someone in the past who'd done more species level related, or more ecosystem level stuff,
Yeah.
thinking about trees and thinking about ecosystems. And then this report being a chance to dive into wild animal welfare and thinking about individual animals. And I think, the more I've learned about it, it shaped the way I interact with the city as a person, and how I see animals in the city, and observe, just observe them interacting with the city too. So I think it's a really it's exciting to be a part of this report, and to hopefully get wild animal welfare and animal welfare on more people's minds. So that's where it starts, right?
Yeah.
It's getting people thinking about it, and then getting policymakers to consider it. And so we're
Awesome.
making moves.
Yeah. So if people want to stay in touch or get in touch, what are the best ways to find you, to find the report, and to read the suggestions that you have there?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way to do that, we have a copy of the report and a summary document in case you don't want to read the 40-page report, which totally understandable. Or you just want to skim the big report. We have the Guarini Center's website. So that is just guarinicenter.org. That's GUARINI. Yeah, I think I got it.
Yes.
Center.org. So you can find that under our publications section. You can find this report and the summary document. I have that's also a great way to find my emails on the page, and we have all the staff at the Guarini Center. If folks want to be in touch about, I'm happy to, shoot me an email. I love talking about this stuff.
Yes.
So always happy to hear from people, and would love feedback on the report. And I think our website's a good place to start. And then you can find me on the people page and send me an email. But
Awesome.
would love to. And thank you so
Yeah,
much for taking the
yeah.
time. And I hope I covered all
You got it.
questions.
Yeah.
The report is really, if people want more, there's so much detail, you can really, really dive in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here and sharing. And like you said, I think it's just like getting the word into the conversation so people can wrestle with it. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah. And I think something else we talk about in the report too is just getting people to think about more types of animals that, it's not, they're kind of common animals, at least in New England. I feel like you're like, oh, deer, maybe some bears in rural New England, raccoon, there's kind of like birds, but also thinking about things like insects, thinking about pollinators, thinking about, like a butterfly, and what food can it find in the city, and flowers, stuff like that. Turtles, just thinking about like, not just like the animals that are more visible to us, like the larger mammals, but also thinking about invertebrates, thinking about smaller animals that are not as visible to us. So getting the word out there. And I want to give a shout out to my, especially to my aquatic friends. I'm a big, I love turtles. I think they're fantastic animals. So
like,
I had to give them
an island.
Exactly. No,
there's
and then there's water species. There's all the fish, there's fish. I think just, getting people in whatever city they're in to just be, just to be seeing more of the residents in terms of like the animal residents of the city. So I want to give all the animals a shout out to close it out. But thank you so much.
They're listening, I hope.
Oh
right?
they're
like the number one.
That's your viewership's gonna be way up, because every butterfly in the city is gonna be downloading to their iPhone.
That would be the best. Like that would be that. I think that is my goal. I want to win over the butterfly
population. No, absolutely. It's a big key supporters of this report. No, just kidding. Can't speak for them, but I hope they like. I think
they're into
I like
it,
to think with there's some like pollinator related, or thinking about choosing plant and tree species based on the natural food provision to different types of animals. So there's something in there for all different animals as well. Awesome. But thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure that you join us on Substack at animal.julianaroth.com, where you can sign up for a newsletter where you get extra bonus doodles and different movement practices and other ways to relate to the non-human animals in our lives.